Yeah, I just give a short introduction. This is for my course in the upcoming Martial Man. And this is a unique and first time we're doing it in martial camp, which is to actually run a short course on weapons. And the weapon that I've chosen to teach is something we call the beggar stick. So before I go into explaining more about the beggar stick and the form itself, I'd like to cover a basic, dialogue or talk about the role, what is the role of learning weapons in the context of modern traditional internal martial arts, you see. Because the argument is, well, in the old days, yes, you do use weapons, in a fight or in war and so on, but in the context, we hardly use weapons, right? And you're not allowed to carry weapons most of the time in a modern civilized society. And also in the context of guns, where you have, guns, then a weapon may be quite useless in such a context. And therefore, the reasoning arises that why do you need to learn weapons in traditional martial arts? Well, I think I can answer that question. Now, firstly, I think one of the main purpose for learning weapons is, of course, learning how to apply it in a martial context. And as you will probably know, in any real martial conflict, anyone that is armed has a big advantage over someone that isn't armed. And therefore, in the old days, in any martial conflict, a barehanded fight is a very rare occurrence, right? And those things only happen when you have a match or, is to settle a disagreement in a gentlemanly manner between two martial artists. But when it comes to an actual conflict, some form of weapons will always be used. And therefore, it's always good in that context, in the ancient, martial arts world, to be proficient with at least one kind of weapon, right? So that, I think, is the answer in the first one. And therefore, the initiative and the need to learn a weapon becomes very primary. But secondly, and this is what I think is least understood, is that by learning different weapons, you actually learn different skills. And those skills have a direct application back to the martial arts in its barehanded forms. For example, if you learn a heavy weapon like a staff, then you actually learn how to use it and use it to develop your muscular structure, your movements, and so on. So think of it as a heavy weapon would be the equivalent of lifting weights in a gym, but in a much more functional and practical way, Doing bicep curls will definitely not help you to apply that skill into, let's say, a real fight, whereas learning how to swing a stick in different ways will be definitely a lot more functional and practical. So different weapons, in fact, will teach you to use different skills. For example, learning a jian, a Chinese sword, you learn to have the more delicate movements in the wrists and arms. You learn to know how to place a weapon at different angles. You learn how to deflect a thrust with either the hilt, the base of the sword, or the tip, and so on, you see. And also you learn a lot about timing and distancing. Whereas shorter weapons like a pak zam dao, or the butterfly knives, you learn more about learning how to use the wrist movements, and also in the act of flipping the blade, you learn about coordination and timing, you see. So you do learn to pick up different skills with different types of weapons. And in fact, this was an insight that was given by me by the late Yap Boh Heong, and he was the one who actually told me, and he teaches a traditional form of Wing Chun called Ip Kin Wing Chun, where he say that depending on which stage of your development, you will learn a different weapon, you see. So, and he was able to, relate that very well to what are the skills that you learn at what stage of your Wing Chun development, and there is an associated weapon that goes along with it. So yeah, so that's the purpose of learning weapons. Okay, now coming back to the beggar stick. Now, as you can see, this is normally what a beggar stick will consist of. It's not a heavy weapon. It's only about belly button length, maybe slightly longer or shorter. And it's normally fairly light. It's not a, yeah. And the reason why is the beggar, right, as he goes around his rounds, he uses a stick partly as like a walking stick, and he will carry his bowl together and he go around like this, you know, begging, right? That's why it's this length and not taller nor shorter, right? So he carries it like as he begs, okay? So in our tradition, the beggar stick is about this length, yeah, belly button length, okay? Now, before we go into the actual stick itself, I'd like to talk a bit about the background about what we term as beggars, okay? And of course, what I'm going to say, part of it is legend, part of it may be truth as well, okay? Now, when what we term as beggars is someone who is out and down on his luck, right? And he has no means of making a living to feed himself. Therefore, he goes around begging for shillings, right? And in the West, this is typified by some guy sitting by the side of the street with a tin mug, right? Or he may be going around asking for a handout. Now, in China, it's similar, right? But most of the beggars, they do not sit around. In the old days, they will actually move around in the streets or in a restaurant asking for handouts, okay? Now, but a beggar in that context is more than that. It's not just someone who is down and out on his luck. Now, this again may be, like I said, part legend, you see. Now, the beggars existed everywhere in olden times in China, all right? In the small villages, in the big cities, in the countryside, and so on. And most of the time, the beggars are wanderers, okay? They do not stay in one place all the time because when pickings are poor or when people sort of like get fed up, you know, this guy is always there looking for a handout. So pickings may be poor, so they tend to move around a lot. Now, the other story goes is that beggars are actually part of an espionage network. Because beggars are everywhere, they tend to be sort of innocent and they sort of, you don't notice them as they fade into the background. So they're always listening in. They have the ability to listen in on conversations, especially in restaurants, on street corners and all that. So they pick up a lot of information. And as the story goes, because of this, the fact that they are picking up a lot of information and so on, for example, it could be in times of war, like troop movement, or also which VIP, into important person, right, is coming to town, when certain people are visiting and so on. So they have all this type of information. Also things like, you know, in the old days where they ship products, goods by horse cart or on, you know, mule packs. So they know the movement of goods, they know the movement of personnel, and also the movement of money, you know. In the old days, it was like in terms of silver or paper money, right? So they have all this information, you see. And often the beggars would work in clans. There would be different clans in different locations, and they will then exchange or even sell this information to different parties. Now, of course, in times of war, this becomes very valuable for the powers that be because it becomes their spy network, their espionage network, whereby they can collect or get information on the so-called enemy. In times of peace, this could be, yeah, information. This sort of information may be useful to bandits and robbers. It could also be useful to law enforcement because they were the information on where the bad guys hang out are, where they're moving, you know, what their plans are, you see. So in that sense, in the legendary terms, the beggars are not as innocent as they look, okay? They may actually be parts of an espionage network. And also partly because of that, they are often being persecuted, right? Not purely because they were spies, but because of the fact that they were looked upon as the lower rung of society, they could also be persecuted and bullied. So as a result, they learned to develop their own martial arts and methods of protecting themselves with the things that they have, meaning the beggar stick. And also, as they move around in old China, there were always stray dogs and so on, and sometimes they would be attacked by stray dogs. So they'll use their stick to fend off the dogs, you see. And that's why sometimes the beggar stick is also known as the dog hitting stick. Okay, in Cantonese we call it Da Gao Guan, you know, the dog for driving off the stick for driving off the dogs. So that is also another name for the beggar stick.